welcome to the Breaking Ice podcast. My name is Josh Ferguson. Today we have the chance to sit down with Dennis Rusch, and we've been trying to make this happen for a while now. That is two visits that maybe this is the second visit and we finally made it happen, but I feel like it's been multiple.
I think it's the third.
The
third
third one?
Yeah, totally. It's been a bit back and forth, but yeah, glad to finally be here.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You've been good lately? You have some big news, eh? What's new in your life?
We're pregnant. Alyssa and I are pregnant, so
That's sick.
We're due in late April. So that's a new chapter in life.
How do you feel about being a father?
Good. It's one of those things. I think everything comes in life in stages, and it feels like something that I'm actually ready for. And life stuff is established, work and all that, and I feel like it's a really great time to it's never a perfect time, right? And
there's no perfect time, and that's the way. There's no way for it. I guess it's possible that there's a perfect time for some people, but
totally. And I think it just feels like the right thing right now. So yeah, it's really neat, and looking forward to it, and just kind of in the process of getting things sorted out, and
that's sick.
It's really good. Yeah.
We when we got married in 2017. Was it 2017 or 2019? It was 2019. We got married in 2019 in October.
What date?
October. I think it was the 16th. I don't think Leanna will watch this episode.
Perfect. I'll cut that
out. And 3 weeks later, she was pregnant, and we were just like, what are we waiting for? But I always tell this to people who are talking about having kids but saying it's not the right time. We were making like $50,000 a year together.
Yeah.
And living in my grandmother's basement at the time.
Totally. And it still works.
Well, yeah. It's like nothing will get you to sort your shit out than knowing that there's a kid on the way.
Totally. Yeah, totally. But it is nice to be, I look back and people that have kids early, and I totally agree. I think you make it happen. But I look at life experience. I look at everything that's going on. I think I can be a way better dad now than I would have been 10 years ago. Right. And that varies from person to person. Right? Absolutely.
So that's excellent. And if you can be a better father now, and then it's definitely the right choice.
Totally.
But I'm so pumped for you guys. It's
gonna be great.
It's so sick. Do you know if it's a boy or girl? You don't have to share that. Obviously.
No. We decided. I really wanted to know, and Alyssa didn't, and we ended up, of course, deciding not to because that makes sense. And then now it's kind of switching around. I don't want to know,
but she wants to
know. We're just kind of talking about it. But no, we'll definitely keep it under wraps until the day of. So yeah, which is great. People always say there's not very many surprises left in life, right? So
yeah. Let me just let me check this camera because you're in a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You can stay where you're comfortable, but I just need to give you the right hand. So we had decided that we didn't want to know, and then it was during COVID, so I wasn't allowed in any of the ultrasounds. And the nurse was like, Leanne was like, no, we decided not to know. And she's like, do you want the sex of the baby in an envelope? And Leanne was like, sure. So then we get out to the car, and she's like, I have it. And I was like, throw it out the window. We're like driving down the highway, and we didn't. And we were like, 3 hours later, we opened it.
Oh, that's funny.
There was no way to.
It's just sitting there.
It was sitting there. It's like, yeah, our future is in this envelope.
Yeah, totally.
We could not do it.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was. It's pretty magical knowing that you're gonna have a kid. Is it? What do you? Is there anything you're afraid of?
Yeah, I think it's a classic thing. I think everyone's parents, grandparents, it's bringing a kid into a crazy world, and I think especially right now. But I think even more than ever, there's so many great tools, and there's so many great role models. I think we're really lucky. We have really good friends that have kids, and we have some great role models that, and I guess role models, and also maybe things like, I don't really want to do that, or hey, I don't think that would work for us. And so I think it's going to be a huge challenge, but it's going to be really exciting.
It'll be the best challenge. I think it's one of the most optimistic things you can do.
No, I like that.
Ever.
Yeah,
it's like it's an act of optimism, because it's like I hear that so often. Oh, like we don't want to bring a kid into this world, and it's like there's a part of me that goes, "What do you mean?" Like I understand what you mean, but that action to me feels so pessimistic, and it's almost dooming everyone else. Totally. In a sense.
Totally.
And I think we're going to struggle from not enough people
Yeah, I mean, there's the maths, if you will, as far as population decline goes,
Sure.
and it's interesting. And I think a part of it too is, as you, like, I've been really fortunate in my career and with goals and things that I feel like I've achieved and I'm really happy with. And I look at, if that's all I had,
Oh yeah.
I don't think, and of course, career and relationship and things like that. I think in 20 years, I'll be like, oh man, like I'm missing something, and as much as it's scary,
You would be.
I totally believe that. And I've never said I didn't want kids, or yeah, I really, really want kids. I've always been, it's like in this mode of I'm ready for something when I feel like I'm ready for something. And, going with that gut feeling and that gut instinct. And this is one that's it's just a step that, it just feels right. And
That's awesome.
It feel really like we feel really set up.
So how
in
far
a
along
sense.
now is Alyssa?
Just entering the third trimester now.
Oh
so
man,
getting
so
there.
it's
Yeah,
right around the corner.
Yeah,
You got
totally.
like 3 months. Your whole life is gonna be different.
Totally.
Oh
totally.
man.
So it's been a
sick.
big move in work wise and everything, trying to make things happen to be as set up as possible when that time comes.
Totally. And well, there's childcare in Yellowknife.
There is, yeah.
One thing that I would recommend considering, even though it's the au pair thing, is like I would almost at this point choose an au pair even if child care was available. It's so awesome because you have so much more control over like your child's education
Totally.
and you like the quality of care that they're getting, and they're the highest priority. They're the only ones. Obviously you can have a network and they can go visit other kids and stuff like that, but in the grand scheme of things it's not that expensive and it's so quality.
Totally.
if you pick the right person, obviously. But
you have control. I think that's the biggest thing versus, I mean, how many kids go to daycare? You hear it all the time, go to daycare, and you're like, where'd you learn that?
Yeah.
Or, you have maybe, again, depending, of course, the quality and everything like that. But yeah, you end up like, what's...
I would highly recommend if you are looking for childcare to consider that avenue,
Totally.
because it's magical. It's very, very cool. And you get this whole relationship with this other person.
Totally.
And obviously you're living with an 18-year-old, which has its downsides.
Fair enough, yeah, totally. Well, it depends how you set it up and,
Totally.
and the boundaries you set and the rules you have. And yeah, absolutely. No, that's good to know. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know what the cost. They say $10 a day. I think does that exist anywhere in Canada?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, and ultimately, like, when we look at childcare, unsubsidized childcare, sometimes it's like $1,800 a month. Like something.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy.
I guess that's not. We're paying like, it's minimum wage.
Yeah,
It's minimum wage full time.
Totally.
Is what she makes.
yeah.
And then she pays a little bit of like rent and stuff like that goes towards food.
Yeah. Totally.
But it feels like now that we're doing it and we're in it, it's like, oh, it's just whatever. It's just a cost that
Totally.
it just happens.
And ultimately, I think obviously it comes from a view of a bit of luxury in a sense. But like, if you have the money to do that, if it's even a little bit more, but it's going to increase the quality of the education of those early years. I mean, I've been reading all these things and listening to these podcasts and things like that. And it's like the first 3 years are the foundation.
Certainly.
And so, as much as I was at the beginning, I was under the impression like, oh, yeah, well, there's not to say no memory, but, the kid's young. It's like kind of whatever. Not at all.
No.
So, I mean, those are things you learn as you start looking into it. It's like, oh, this is actually way more important than I thought it was.
My family history has this. Everyone's family history has a crazy background, but there was a lot of conflict in my mom's childhood between her parents, and at one point, her mother came and got her, and then just like flew to California. Like she just went to her husband's house, her ex-husband's house, picked up my mom, got on a plane, and went to California with like kind of without any notice.
Wow.
And my mom was 2. And my mom like didn't realize how much that affected her until she had me. And then she was raising me and she was looking at me when I was 2. And she goes, there's no way he wouldn't notice that.
Right. Totally.
Like, and it's true. Like Ben, like he would notice if all of a sudden his life changed immediately and he was with different people all the time, and he would roll with it and it would impact him. But he's like taking so much in right now. It's insane. And
well, that development, right?
Yeah.
Where, like it's been a really fun journey of learning. And I think, it's another really need peace and trying to be you want to be the best at things. That's my view anyway. I want to be the best at things I take on.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, what's success as a parent? People always say it's your kids want to spend time with you when they don't need to.
Yes.
So I guess some of this, the success, if you will be when they're old enough to leave and they choose to come back and spend time.
Yeah.
Leave the house, but they want to come back for Christmas. They want to,
Totally.
and I think so it's going to be a really like slow burn of like, call it success. And I think it'll be a really great, next chapter for sure.
There's, how do I silence this? Okay, whatever. The two like quotes. One is that you're about to enter the longest, shortest time, which is like, it feels like it will never end, but it goes by in a blink.
Right.
At the same time. But then the other frame that I really enjoy and I think is such a good like perspective is that you have until your kids are 4 to make your kids someone that other people like. And that's an important milestone. If other people don't like your kids by the time they're 4, their life is statistically going to be a lot harder than it needs to be.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Like spending time with being invited over to someone's house.
Totally.
If play with them in the playground.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So just make your kids someone who other people want to be around. And if that's the case, then you're on a good path already.
I like that. Yeah.
And then what's that other wing is like, don't let your kids do anything that makes you dislike them.
Right.
And that's a really important one as well. And I think that one's a little bit of a harder thing to implement because like kids will do stuff that you don't like all the time, but there's a difference between not liking what they did and not liking them.
Totally.
Totally.
When a lot of stuff, what I'm reading now, it's really fascinating to me. It's kids have to learn boundaries the hard way, right?
Hell yeah.
It's like they don't know what a boundary is until they do something and that's over a boundary.
What's
right?
that?
Like it's really fascinating.
I disagree with a lot of modern parenting. Oh my goodness, my brother is just kind of ethos these days, and I don't know, maybe I'm an old soul or whatever, but we'll see in we'll see in the long run.
Yeah, totally.
How this shakes out.
Totally.
But anyways, my whole thing is like, people are like, oh, I'm just gonna let the kid take the lead, and there's so much I can learn from them. And it's like, yes, that's true in that you will learn things from your kid, but your kid isn't teaching you things like intentionally.
Right.
Like it's teaching you things about yourself, and they'll give you a perspective into the world that you didn't have previously because you're looking at the world through their eyes, which is a whole new being, right? But you got to lay down the law. Right. Like your kids need to learn what the rules are, and they don't know what the rules are. How could they?
Yeah, exactly. It's just that brain development is so wild to me. Like, it's such an interesting concept. Yeah, it's really neat, and I think I think it will be, obviously there's going to be trials and tribulations, but I think it is a really cool thing to have this, overwhelming, but really cool to have this. It's a 24/7 thing.
Yeah.
That you're in, and it's going to teach you a lot of patience and adjustability, adaptability. Yeah, I think it's going to be great.
I'm just going to point your attention over here. For the viewers, we recorded an episode before this, but I messed up the audio. You see the difference here? This is my track, and then this is you talking.
Is this thing on?
Yeah, that thing is on. But you can see the problem with the editor is it didn't have... It would put a cut right here, right?
Oh, I see,
so
yeah.
It was a really obvious, this person started talking, and it didn't have that
right
in the previous one.
Yeah, it should be one's low, one's high,
exactly,
one's low, one's
exactly.
high.
And
yeah.
now we have that. Now we can see.
Totally.
You, me, you, me.
Totally.
Anyways.
Right on.
Yeah.
One thing that won't happen again, I'm sure.
Tell me about... no, never. Tell me about what were you like as a kid? For everyone watching, Dennis works for Acasta Heliflight, part of Canadian Helicopters, and he's a pilot. And what's the name of your title right now?
General Manager of Flight Operations.
Okay. So you've kind of progressed in your career. You're still flying, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And new thing now as well is training. So so the flying side and doing of course the call it the front of house thing, but then also in the background doing the hiring and training as well.
Has training pilots made you look at flying in a different way?
Oh, 100%.
In what way?
I think it's really taught me a lot about how to effectively communicate better.
Okay.
I'm more, I like to, for anyone that knows me, I've, by saying things out loud is how my brain reabsorbs the information. And I learned a lot about filtering out what's unnecessary in that environment, because you're in a training environment, you're flying an aircraft, and I mean, we're not, this isn't the initial training teaching someone to fly. This is recurrent training and endorsement training.
You're making people's, I see what you're saying.
So
you're not necessarily progressing the skill, you're just maintaining it.
So it depends. It's a great question. So for sure, there's the side of it of where you're maintaining, where we'd have to do annual training on all the types of helicopters that we fly.
That's like when Dieter trains Travis.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Same idea. And then for sure, these helicopters are such a diverse tool. You can go from, early on in your career, just taking passengers A to B, to as your career progresses, it's more advanced flying. Like, you suddenly go flying in the mountains, or now suddenly you have a long line on 100-foot long line underneath the helicopter, and you're leaning out the side, and in construction, for example, or building or power lines or things like that. So 100% there is that progression that I'm a part of as well, where as someone's building skills, recognizing where we can take a next step, and then building a roster within the company. We have 13 helicopters. Building a roster.
Same kind of helicopters or different helicopters?
Everything that I've flown before, nothing too new.
Okay.
For me, like I didn't have everything that's at Acasta, I've already had the endorsement on, so nothing new in that sense.
But how many different kinds of helicopters?
Oh, sorry, 3 different types.
Types.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So in terms of the training, has the recurrent training been the thing that has opened your eyes in terms of how to look at flying, or has it been the kind of growth training, for lack of a better way to put it?
I think the recurrent's been really interesting because our pool is just so experienced, and I think it's been really neat to have the opportunity to, feel worthy of having that title and having the ability and the being allowed to train, and being able to train someone that has 4 times as much experience as me.
So for anyone listening who doesn't know anything about aviation, recurrent training is training that, correct me if I'm wrong here, I'll try and explain it. Like every 6 months or so, a pilot will need to get trained on an aircraft that they've been flying for a long time with another experienced pilot, just to make it's like peer review.
Totally, 100%. Yeah, it's a great way of saying it.
Okay,
totally.
And that's accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely. So with us, it's annually.
Okay.
But yeah, it's same exact idea. So basically, what we're doing every year is making sure that someone's up to the standard that Transport Canada sets out, through that, it's having that ability to educate and have that side of it, while also I think there's a lot of personalities, a lot of in general in this type of world, a lot of type A personalities. And it's trying to be trying to do the recurrent training side, trying to do the, so to speak, the assessment, but then also education. And then at the same time also, well, what can I learn from this person that's been potentially doing this longer than me, but also maybe someone that's less experienced, that just has a different viewpoint.
It's also a cool, even like, I can imagine it's easy to look at those things as like, okay, we have to do, like, I know you're fine at flying this aircraft, like we've got to take 5 hours to do this or whatever it is. But it's also a cool medium for pilots to learn from each other, right? Like, even though you're training Bob, you're probably going to learn things from Bob throughout that training.
And the thing, keep in mind as well, for people in the fixed wing background, where there's a lot of 2 crew environments, you have a pilot and a co-pilot, or a pilot flying, a pilot monitoring, however you want to say it. Everything we do at Acasta is all single pilot. So once, you're totally right. Quite often, the only time someone gets to fly with another pilot is in training that year.
So it's even more valuable.
Totally. And it's just been a really neat experience in trying to learn how to communicate more effectively, and also on the leadership role side, trying to portray the information properly, and trying to be I pride myself on trying to have as much knowledge as I can, trying to be the best at what I'm doing. And I spend a lot of time trying to make things like, how can I get better? How can I be better? How can I lead by example? But now the new thing is like, how can you also be approachable at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, you want
That's
people
huge.
to want to train with you.
Totally. And, I've got some really great, I did some training on a mentor of mine. He was actually the chief pilot when I started flying.
Oh, cool.
And I got to do his training the last 2 years.
It's fun when those things kind of come full circle.
It's so cool. And, as much as he's got so much more time than me, and he's, in my view, he's such a great leader, I never once felt like he was like undermining or trying to, nothing like that. He was just, he actually, when he finished, he's like, actually learned quite a few things. And I thought that was the coolest, how do you call that? Like review, if you will, of
that's awesome feedback.
Oh, it's unreal.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be perfect. It's just now it's every time I try to take every single flight and say, okay, well, what could I have done better? And I think effective communication it has been something that's really been coming out of this. And it doesn't just apply to in the cockpit. It also applies in the office, talking to customers. And let's be honest, it applies to your marriage.
Oh my goodness.
To your friendships. It applies to everything.
Your kid.
Exactly. And that's the new thing. And I think there's such a neat, this training thing has, I think, again, when we look at, I think the world is such a, you put something out and it comes back in some way or another.
Yeah.
I think it's just been this perfect timing with having this wherewithal, having these thought processes where now I think it can be applied in a few different, we call it realms, if you will, the same thought process.
Domains.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's so sweet. So you have this, strive towards excellence and holding yourself to a high standard and kind of analyzing, the way you're doing things and wanting to improve on that. Where did those values come from?
I'm not too sure. I think I was born and raised in Switzerland, very, very European.
And your parents
family.
are both Swiss?
Yeah, that's right. So, and my mom's grandma was Dutch and her dad was Swiss. So my mom's half Dutch. I'm quarter Dutch.
So what was your childhood like? Give me like, I don't know, before you moved to Canada, what was like,
So yeah, I grew up in the hotel business. So my parents were managing hotels in Switzerland. And grew up in that business. So I think that was a huge factor in what I do now. I think I naturally became very customer oriented.
And a service mindset.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think in a way that we can say, rather than, well, what can I get out of this transaction, is what can I give? And what comes out of it is a byproduct, right? And I think, of course, that works with money. Like, hey, I have a service. I'm going to provide the service. You give me money.
Sure.
But I think that transaction actually works with money is the simplest one.
Yeah, it's reductionist almost. Like,
totally, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, growing up in that business, it was very, customer oriented. It was, it was all in Switzerland, in the Alps, in a ski town. Really competitive, and parents worked long hours, and it was a really neat way to grow up, because half of my growing up till I was 12 was in Switzerland, very densely populated, very established, very culturally driven. And then at 12 moved to Canada and moved to Northern Ontario, and family bought a hunting and fishing lodge. So still that realm of service industry, still the customer driven, still the accommodation industry. But it was going from probably the most established, call it not civilized, but most established, most regimented part of the world.
It's kind of elite in Switzerland,
totally,
right? Yeah,
100%. To the bush in Northern Ontario. It was a 30-minute drive to school, and the next biggest town was an hour away.
Where in Ontario did you grow up?
Near North Bay.
Oh,
so 4 hours north of Toronto.
All right.
And it was again now.
I know that area well. Where near North Bay?
At Crystal Falls.
Okay. Yeah,
so just a bit. You kind of have to go out towards the west a little bit towards Sudbury, and then up north into a little lake there.
Yeah, near Sturgeon Falls.
Yeah, exactly. About half hour to Sturgeon Falls to the north. But it was a very very split childhood in a sense, in a great way, not in a bad way. In a great way.
I have a very similar story.
Interesting.
Moving to Mexico, right? I was 9.
Yeah.
So is it a time when you have a social life, you're established as a kid, and then you're upended in this big way, and I wouldn't change it for anything. But totally. I think that kind of like uprooting is we're talking about how we can do that with our kids when they're older.
Yeah.
Like even if we say move away from here in like a year or two, that I don't feel like that counts because the kids are still too young.
Right.
You know, like they
Totally.
need to like be comfortable in their place, and then we have like I think it's so valuable to learn how to make friends when you're 12,
Totally.
right?
Absolutely.
Instead of just having the friends that you've had and you don't even remember making friends.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
And I think that's where you get that piece where it's that, small town, and you just stay in that small town mentality. I think by doing that, you're, as hard as it is, like, I wouldn't say it was that hard on me. I was excited to come to Canada. But it almost makes you kind of start a new chapter, and versus kind of being maybe stuck in the kind of that older, not to say older mindset, but friendships should grow. And as great as it is to have lifelong friends, it's lifelong friends that you can grow with.
Yeah.
And so, I think that moving away, and it sounds like you're in exactly the same spot. You kind of almost a before and after
Totally.
life. And it was, I think the contrast for me, was huge. And being able to move away, then after that, we were in Ontario, and I went to flight school, and I just turned 19, and I packed 2 duffel bags and moved to Yellowknife.
Yeah. Well, moving like that wasn't foreign to you. You're like, yeah, I can do this.
Totally. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'd be lying if I said it was easy, but it was the right thing to do. And I think I've always had, and I more now than ever, it keeps growing, like just a sense of adventure. I love the sense of adventure. I love, it's as much as it doesn't exist much anymore, but I love exploration.
Oh, it exists. It exists.
Well, I mean, nowadays it's like, okay, we can, I'm not necessarily interested in, climbing some unnamed peak in the Himalayas, but to go out and explore, even while at work, going out flying and going somewhere you've never been before, and learning a landscape and things like that.
Just because someone's been there before doesn't mean you have information about that place.
Exactly, totally. And I mean, I think that's a piece in the North that's just fundamental. Is sometimes I think I've had the chance in the North, and then a chance while at work. I've got the chance to go to Antarctica. I think in both places, for sure I've been somewhere where no one's ever been.
Yeah.
And to me, that fills this really neat,
That's very cool.
I call it a cup that I want to keep filling of this adventure and this, as much as I'm not a hermit and want to be out in the middle of nowhere and not be around people, but it's having that chance to have that community and having that engagement and being around people, but then also having that chance to be away from everything and be truly.
I think it's an important grounding.
Totally. And it's a contrast, I think, that for me is huge. And it's funny, I see it, if I've been stuck in the office a little too long, and then all of a sudden you go into a 3-4 day job and come back and you're like, man, I feel like
it's nice that your work enables that for you.
Oh, it's huge.
That's very cool.
Yeah, totally. Super lucky in that way.
So can you describe your parents a little bit more? I'm interested to know what their character, like what was your dad like?
It was interesting. My dad was always the very quiet type. He was always very, knew he was the man in charge, but always very quiet, a bit more on the gentle side. And my mom was a bit more, call it the face of the family, and a bit more social, a bit more, community was big to her, versus my dad he was happy with his small circle of friends and family. So it was a really interesting way of growing up. And I think a piece that was interesting for me was that Swiss mentality is very much like, it's rooted in this confidence, and which is great. And that confidence is based on reality. Like, people are good at what they do. People are confident in what they do. But I realized, as I was growing up, that you also have to be really open-minded. And so I think through my parents and through the way that they were, this kind of gentler side, the more call it maybe a bit, lack of a better word, abrasive side, mixed in with the fact that, like, hey, there's a very well-established confidence. Like, I had role models that were very confident, but then at the same time, it took a bit of unlearning to be like, okay, I can be confident and be very good at what I do, but I also need to be open-minded, and I also need to be open to change. I also need to shut my mouth and listen.
Do you feel like the move enabled learning that?
I think so. I think having that very differentiating, call it European mindset versus that North American mindset, and having that mix was a good change. And I think there was a time when, you grew up with people that are confident and they tell you that what you're doing is good. Well, you're going to be confident. And then at the same time, you meet the right people that are like, hey, like maybe just you need to tone it down a little bit. And I think that's right now is in the role that I'm in, it's if you're just good and you're aiming for perfectionism and that's what you throw out there, I think that doesn't make you approachable. And it's really hard, even if someone is really good as well, if someone isn't in the same mind space, it's really hard for them to feel confident to approach you and talk to you and be open with you. So now it's that I've built that. I don't really, it sounds funny to say, but like, I don't really know a lot of people that will outwork me. Like in the
Sure.
business that I'm doing. Like,
Yeah.
And that's something that like I can, like that'll never stop and I'll always do that.
Yeah.
But now in a bit more of a leadership role and in that team building and that team mentality, it's like, okay, actually just constantly trying to be the best is actually can be intimidating.
Well, and it also, like, the area in which you need to aim at being the best in has shifted, right? Like, it's not
Totally.
useful for you to be the best at the things that you needed to be the best at before to grow your career. Now it's like, okay, dude, grow up.
Totally,
You know?
100%. And I think like that's the piece now that's been really interesting is trying to become like work on some very like small steps and working towards having not just being good at what you do and putting a really good face forward, because I think leading by example is massive.
Yeah.
And at the same time also being, I think vulnerability is huge.
It's huge. It's so important for leadership, because if people who you're leading can have an experience where you're trusting them, like this is like, it's like a social hack, I think, in that, like, so the summer camp I grew up at is in Temagami, by the way. I'm not sure if you knew that.
Yeah. It's like
just
half hour.
It's so close.
Yeah,
it's like
totally.
an hour and 20 minutes. Oh, no, not even like 40 minutes from you.
It's right there.
So did you spend much time in the lakes there or no?
Just like, honestly, like very localized, because of course with the parents, with the family business there, we
You were
didn't really
busy
have
during the
chance.
summers.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
We didn't really leave our little world very often. So, but yeah, I'm super familiar with the area.
Oh, I know. There's trips, like there's loops in that area where I could do it without a map. I've done it so many times.
Yeah.
Anyways, what was I saying? Something about leadership. Can you jog my memory?
Just you're saying like working at the camp and
So there is a huge focus on vulnerability and sharing, and so like one of the things that we would do is we kind of conceptualize it as like there's the inner journey and the outer journey for our trips. So you'd go on a trip, the kids would show up, and you'd go on a 20-day trip. The outer journey is the trip, right? It's like the carrying of the canoes and the paddling and setting up your tents. And then there's the inner journey, which is like your experience of the whole thing. And I think is such a important framing, because it's like your inner journey is going to be different than my inner journey. And our goal on this trip is to marry all those things into one. So one of the tools that we use, we just call them circles. So at night we'd, every other day or so, we'd sit down and we'd ask a question, and we would expect everyone to answer and answer truthfully. And if they didn't, if they bitched out, you would give them feedback and be like, I don't think you were really being genuine there, and I think you need to try harder in that realm. It's hard for some kids to share.
Totally.
So, one of the things, like, for example, a group of 16-year-old boys, the prompt would be, so when was the last time you cried? And it's only 16-year-old boys. And then maybe you would model as the guide, and you would go first. And then you'd be like, okay, like, you guys can choose. Do you want to go, like, popcorn style? Like, do you want to just volunteer, or do you want to go around the circle? And you get to pick or whatever. And then you wait. And you're not getting up till everyone answers. Yeah. And it's so amazing the impact that would have on the group after a hard day. Or maybe you'd have conflict, and then you would sit down and talk about this thing where that was kind of unrelated but tangentially related to the conflict in a sneaky way. It's like maybe one kid was like thinking that he was the shit, so you do a circle about ego or something like that, and and then maybe if that kid decides to be vulnerable, he shares how, you know, his dad's really hard on him at home or whatever, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I understand you.
Yeah.
And it just diffuses the whole thing.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's important in terms of what you were talking about in terms of leadership and being vulnerable. Is like, one of the things I do to make friends is I'll take the first step at being vulnerable without even a prompt. I'll just like, I'll trust you. Right.
Yeah.
And if I'm vulnerable with you, then that gives you the tools to hurt me. And the trust is trusting that you're not going to do that.
Right.
Right. And then as soon as I trust somebody, they go, huh, like subconsciously, he trusted me. Well, maybe I can trust him. And then it just builds that trust like right away.
Yeah, totally.
And it's such a useful tool. And the other thing is, if you can establish that vulnerability and that baseline communication trust, then you can help each other grow. So, for example, one thing that I would practice at the summer camp is I try and, it has to be true feedback, but I try to give the harshest feedback I could, aiming at the highest thing I could for that person, and just see if I could do it, right? And it's like, if someone tells you that you really screwed something up and it's true, that's such a gift, and especially if they're willing to tell you how to not do it again, right? And like, we would do feedback with our guides, so they'd come back from a trip and it's like, you know, I know you worked really hard, but you really botched this part of the whole thing, and it was for these reasons, and I know that you can do better, but this time you really missed the mark. Mm-hmm. And like, that can be really hard on somebody, but I think it's better than not telling them.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. What's that constructive criticism?
Yes. Constructive feedback.
Right?
Yeah. Constructive criticism. It's like, it's not, it's not mean if you can do it right.
Well, and when it comes from the right place, I think that's the other piece of it. You have to come from the right place for people to understand, and for people to, and I think maybe that's a part of it too, having, someone has to welcome that, mm-hmm. right, in a sense. And I think that's interesting from a way of in a career oriented piece, where you can say, okay, we've got this unit that we're working with, and you can be a part of the solution, or you can be a part of the problem. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think everyone can bring something to the table, but I think there's also a line, there's a box that we have to operate out of, rules and regulations wise. There's a box of of expectations that, you're going to treat people, your customer, your passengers, whatever, with
sure.
respectfully,
yeah.
Safety, rules and regulations, company SOPs, all those things. Those are all very much in a box. And at the same time, there's other parts that are outside that box that we can work with.
It's funny because I was just thinking about, like, at the summer camp, we definitely had rules and regulations that we had to follow working with kids. And we were talking before about how if you can't explain the reason for something, it's probably not a good reason.
Yeah.
Just because I said so, which makes me so incompatible in a lot of ways with industries that are highly regulated. Because if there's a rule that I don't understand, or I really think is counterproductive or something, it drives me crazy that I have to follow it. Like, it makes me crazy.
Totally.
So
it's like that military mindset, right? Where it's like, you can't ask questions.
Well,
you have to follow
that. I think as I've gotten older, that makes more sense to me, because it's life and death in some ways. It's like, there needs to be a chain of command, and the reason there needs to be a chain of command is because it needs to be efficient, or else you die.
Yeah, no, totally. It's fair. But right. But you can take that and translate it into something else. You can say, okay, well, if we don't follow this rule, you can flip our canoe and drown.
No.
So it's really interesting. Like, how far do you build the box?
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Is a piece. I think that's, at what point do you put the box in that has to, like, the layers or the borders, if you will, that you have to establish, versus at what point can we go outside of that and be creative and be, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, you have your rules and regulations. You have a customer that is pushing, say, weather or weight or whatever it is. Yeah. Okay, well, I can use, while still being kind and professional, I can use psychology to actually make them understand that, hey, like, it's going to be 2 trips, or hey, it's going to be another day tomorrow because the weather's crappy today. Yeah. Without just being like, well, here are the rules and this is what we're following. So see you later.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting thing. And I think that's been a piece throughout this, I call it this new chapter, I guess, where it's not just being a pilot, not just being a base manager, but kind of growing in that where, you have to constantly be adaptable and have to, like, I think if you stop thinking about it and stop, if you're not laying in bed at night and think about, okay, how can we be better? How can this be, oh man, I screwed that up. Or, hey, that went really well. I think it's just you're gonna stagnate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to throw in was the flip side to the giving harsh feedback with like a foundation of, I guess, love behind it and a better aim, a higher aim, a high aim, is that if then you can go, okay, what can I do better?
Totally.
Absolutely. At the same time. And then if someone, a subordinate, for lack of a better way to put it, sees you implement their feedback, it's like, whoa, totally. Like I had an impact on, my situation and the boss, and now things are better. Totally. I think that's huge.
I think a part of it too that's been really fascinating is, and I think I learned that through some podcasts and some just on leadership and things like that. And some of it's just accidental. It's just, you just extrapolate it out of conversations.
Yeah.
Is that there are people that are always going to be, for lack of a better word, like anti-authority. And it's not about authority, but it's just anti whatever, there's someone above me. And so there's something
disagreeable.
Yeah, I think so. And I think
that so when you encounter someone like that, what's your instinct?
I think the instinct is just trying to not have that conflict to start with, in a sense, where you're like, well, why would you, like, why would you, I wouldn't say it's not about questioning, but hey, if I lead by example, and if I'm not afraid of doing whatever needs to be done, if I work as hard as I possibly can, it shouldn't come to that. But sometimes it does, just because some personalities, right? And I think I saw something recently that really opened my eyes to it. It was that the reward, if you will, of leadership, or being in a role of leadership, is it's not necessarily everything going well and everyone getting along and having a great time. It might actually be conflict, and maybe a year later, that person that you had that conflict with actually is like, oh man, I learned something from that. Or hey, maybe no, and it's not about like, hey, like I was wrong, that person's right. Nothing. It's not about right or wrong. It's just simply about, hey, I learned something from this situation, and they grow from it. And I think the ultimate reward would be that person coming back and being like, hey, I learned something from this, and communicating that. But in reality, 9 out of 10 times, you'll never hear it. You might just have a guy that's now, or a person that now enjoys their job more. Maybe you see them being more successful because of for example, bringing it right back what you're saying, a harsh criticism, and they didn't take it well, but they apply it anyway, and now they're doing better. That's when
you reward them.
Totally. But I mean, and I think in that sense, it's like, it's a really fascinating thing where
it's so cool.
I think that reward, I guess, that it doesn't really, I don't think, because I'm still new to it, and the learning is so, it's just every day, and I mean, it shouldn't stop.
But the reward could just be like a recognition.
Totally.
It doesn't have to be like, here's a cookie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think sometimes you have to be okay just with not hearing anything, and just someone just living their life is just enough, right? Like in a sense, right? Like where, and I mean, I think it applies to everything. Sure. Maybe having that argument or disagreement with your spouse might lead to, hey, you're right, thanks for bringing that forward.
Yeah.
Or maybe with your kid, it means that now they're more, maybe they're going to be a better friend, which means they're going to have buddies to hang out with and be invited to a birthday party. But at work, it might be as simple as just someone is just happier at their job, but you don't hear that. You don't hear that feedback.
Well, yeah. Well, the whenever I encountered a kid, it was different because it's different. When we were working with youth on the trips, it wasn't about, like, it's different than having an employee who was being obstinate, totally. When the kid was on the trip who was being a dick, we had a lot of latitude to just kind of like make it happen. You know what I mean? And not in a mean way or whatever, but like we didn't depend on, they didn't have responsibility that was like crucial for the business.
Totally.
You know, so we were able to really challenge those kids. And whenever I had a hard kid like that, it was interesting to like step into the arena. Like we framed it as stepping into the arena. You have the choice. Like, you're going to get in there or you're not going to get in there. Totally. And it's like, I'm going to get in there. Let's make it happen.
But I think it's a big part that's been interesting for me anyway. I don't mind conflict.
Yeah.
Like I don't mean I don't seek conflict for the sake of seeking conflict, but if something isn't going right,
you don't need to avoid conflict.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are
for the sake of avoiding conflict.
Well, it's like, hey, I know I'm supposed to deal with this, but I won't because I don't want to.
That's Canada.
Yeah, it's a good point. No, it's true. No, it's right. No, in a sense, it is for sure.
Yeah.
And I think being able to constructively speak your mind and, the shit sandwich, right? It's good, bad, good. Those are all things that are like,
that's a good tool, actually.
It is, but it's also hard because sometimes, I'm sure you've seen this too, but like sometimes you're like, man, it's just, they're really, not to say there's nothing good, but it's like, you kind of screwed the pooch here. Like, can we just talk about that? But
the good can even be like, hey, thanks for hearing me out.
Oh, I like that.
Right?
And yeah, totally.
That's huge. It's small shit like that makes a big difference.
No, absolutely. That's a really good point. Excellent point.
Yeah, because like it could be that they did everything wrong. You don't need to sugarcoat it. Be like, yeah, you're really a good person and this and that. It's like, no, that's bullshit. You fucked it up. I know you can do better. That's the other positive thing is like, it's confidence in them. Totally. Because I heard this thing that really struck a chord, but it was, one of the saddest things in our current world is how little encouragement people need to believe in themselves.
Right.
Which just highlights how little encouragement they're getting at all.
Right. No, that's a good point for sure.
And you should never assume, like, you don't know what people's backgrounds are, what their family life is like, what their childhood was like, or what kind of depravity they grew up in, or even what kind of excess. It doesn't even matter if your family was super wealthy. Maybe you had all the things that you needed, but it felt empty because your parents never acknowledged you. Totally. And it does break my heart how little encouragement people need to then voluntarily pick up their burden. Totally. And that's what we need to do to get through it all. And that's why leadership is so important. Absolutely.
It's interesting though, that whole, things I think that seem that just seem assumed or seem, of course, I'm trying to think as an example, a kid scored a goal in soccer, right? Yeah. For example, of course the kid knows that scoring a goal is great and that's part of the sport and was a good team player and passed it and got it back and scored a goal. Like, you didn't just hog it or whatever it is. But if you don't say that, hey, like this, I'm proud of you. You did that was well done. And all that practice that you did really paid off. And you played with your team and that's why you scored. Like a kid might not know that. That's really the goal.
If you hone in that example, the kid does it and scores a goal and you say, awesome, you should have passed it. Right. It's like, well, I got it in the net. It's like, yeah, I know, but it's not just about you.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, totally. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think that comes across.
Did you ever watch Ted Lasso?
No.
Dude, you gotta watch Ted Lasso.
Everyone's been telling me this. 100%.
You gotta watch it. It's one of the best, one of the most impressive character growth shows that I've ever seen.
Cool. I've heard a lot of people have been saying this, so it's on the list.
You gotta watch it. It's totally. so good.
But it's interesting. It's a really, I think being able to take life lessons and being able to apply them throughout a range of things is huge. And, it's the same thing as like, can you be great at work? Can you be, have great relationships at your work? Can you be a great husband? Can you be a great father? Can you be a great friend?
Yeah.
I think as time goes on, I think we need to focus on things. And I think I focused heavily and still do obviously on work.
Yeah. And do you think that's a weakness of yours? Do you have too much attention on work?
I don't know. I think it used to be.
Yeah.
I 100% think it used to be.
Yeah.
But
well, as a young man, sometimes you don't have anything else.
No. And it's not that you don't have anything else. I truly believe that I think we need to spend, there's two trains of thought. You either, and I can't remember who said this, but it was basically you either spend your 20s in that grind and in establishing yourself, and you actually missed out maybe a little bit on like the social world, or you spend your 20s in a social world having a great time, and at the end, by the end of your 20s, you don't have that much to show for it.
The first one.
Well, I think maybe it was the way I was brought up. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was just who I am, the drive I had. But I think like I have zero regrets about spending that time and establishing myself. And I've had the chance to do things that I'm, you know, I look at my life so far, and I can truly say like I'm happy with what I've done. I'm proud of. I don't think I've missed out on anything.
Yeah.
And you know, I think where I am career wise, I'm really happy with, and at my age and all that. And at the same time, I think, you know, the relationships that I've managed to build, the people I can call friends, I'm really happy with, and relationships with, and like marriage and being with a great person, being married to a great person, and now having the chance to start a family.
It's magical.
It's amazing. And now being in a spot where I have a great job, I get to fly, I get to train, I get to learn, but I'm also home and have time to spend with the family. It is more of a, not necessarily, I wouldn't say 9 to 5, but you're home a lot more than if I was flying and I was on a 3 and 2 rotation or whatever it might be. So I think that hard work and maybe foregoing some fun and some social activity in my 20s actually established for now where it's really important for me to be home.
It's the groundwork.
Totally. And I think I wish I could say, oh yeah, it was all planned out, I got it all sorted. No. A part of it was 100% accidental.
But you probably had, it wasn't necessarily planned out, but you had the values instilled in you when you were young to do such a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why parenting is so important, right?
Totally. Exactly.
I was going to say, there has been a lot of like, in our culture, a lot of scrutinizing the differences between men and women, and people claiming that there's no difference, et cetera, et cetera. Anyone who knows me knows that I think there's a difference. And I like the phrase equal but different, because I like women, amazing. Not men. Men, amazing, not women. Totally. You know, yeah, totally. And I couldn't live the life I have without Leanna, who supports me in all the ways that she does, but then also takes care of all of the things that she does for our family that are invaluable. But I heard one thing about how lonely men are in their 20s, and how women don't necessarily feel that lonely because they're just like inherently generalized. Women are more social beings.
Yep.
And they have more, you know, like a microcosm of this. And this is a total stereotypical example, but is like, oh, like let's go to the bathroom together.
Right.
You know?
No, it's a great example.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then I've also heard people say, you know, men shouldn't be that lonely because it's bad for them. And I think, I don't know if it is. I'm kind of think it should be that way.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a piece of the journey.
Well, it is a piece of the journey, and getting through that. And then when you do get married and you do have a family, well, what is it? Statistically, married men live longer.
Yeah, totally.
And then you really appreciate it, because you know the depravity of being alone and having nothing but work and friends, but like kind of like nothing but work.
Or maybe a bit shallow friendships, not that relationship. But I think that's at the same time though, it's a scary. It's just kind of a two-sided thing. It's scary in a sense because I think sometimes men don't have the ability or don't have the tools until they're in or have a chance at a relationship. They don't really have ever had to use those tools. So now when they get in a relationship with a great woman, they sadly don't have the tools to actually be a good partner. And so I think that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect, and I just saw this stat a little while ago, and actually like fact checked it as far as you can looking at the internet.
Sure.
But now
I did my own research.
Well, I hate that term so much, but I mean, all you can do is
no one can do their own research, but everyone has to.
Exactly. Right. So I heard this on a podcast and I was like, there's no way. So I looked it up, and it's in the US. It's a US fact or a US stat. Sorry. And now the male suicide rate under 32 from 18 to 32 is higher than the breast cancer rate in women.
Whoa.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
So I think it's actually getting worse. Like what you're saying and what maybe used to be a healthy depravity from that social norm, a health depravity from
the internet is an unforeseen. I think that exasperates it, and
Totally.
and also these micro communities where you can, instead of needing to put yourself out there in the world, in your real world locally, you can go into these micro climates on the internet, which I think can be really toxic.
Totally.
So that's a difficult thing, and I'm not advocating for, men should be so lonely that they commit suicide.
No, totally. But I mean, it's just interesting because I think I'm totally on the same page as you, as like having that. I totally think it's a part of the growth. And then you hear that stat and you're like, holy man, I'm not saying it's gone too far, but it's a really interesting thought process.
It doesn't sound like it's in a healthy place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's an interesting place at this point. And I think you touched on it just earlier, is like the internet is, and the fact that access to the internet it's just global. I mean, look, there's a Starlink in just about every house
It's
now.
incredible.
Totally. But I think what it's created is whatever you're doing is not good enough. You can go online and you can find a podcaster with 4 million views. I can go online and I can watch a guy that does something that I maybe can't do, or maybe there's a guy that flies a
does something that you can do, but way better.
Totally. And I think like we can use that as a guide and say, hey, I can strive for this, but I think there's also, we can go into a place of defeat where we can say, well, I'll never be that.
Yes. That's nihilism and nothing matters. But we need to fight against that.
Well, and I think it's like the best way, or the best thought process on that is that comparison is a thief of joy. Like you have your piece that you can contribute, and you can build and mix and match your world. And yeah, maybe that guy is really good at playing guitar, but maybe he's, again, it's not comparing, but it's like maybe he spends so much time doing that he doesn't have time to foster a great relationship with a really close friend, or whatever the case might be.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that loneliness, maybe not depravity necessarily, but that loneliness is important because it gives you a contrast for what you then have later in your life that you can be grateful for, and then too, well, if you also like sabotage your marriage and were single now, you'd be far lonelier than you were in your 20s.
Yeah, totally.
But the way out of that loneliness, and I'm sure that you would agree with this, but it's is at least it's for women and men, but is to adopt responsibility. So if you take on responsibility, then you're taking on basically caring for other people in some way, right?
Yeah,
sure. And if you can do that and you take on as much responsibility as possible, that's how you derive meaning, right? And that's a job, a relationship, children. And if you fill your life with responsibility, people are afraid of that because it means that you can fail. But like, I can't imagine not.
Right.
And it is such a privilege. It's interesting because it's like this paradoxical thing where like, until I started prioritizing myself more, I wasn't able to care for other people.
Right. It's counterintuitive.
It's super counterintuitive. Like once I started putting myself first, all of a sudden I could put other people first in a much better way. Before I started really putting myself and my family first, I couldn't provide for my family adequately. And now, I have 2 kids and a wife, and she works too, but we also have an au pair. So my household is 5 people that I feel responsible for. And there's no way I could have, we were barely taking care of ourselves before we really decided to put ourselves first.
Yeah.
And I am fascinated by this paradox of you need to put yourself first so that you can put other people first, and it's a counterintuitive thing. And I don't know. I assume I'm wrong about everything, but
well, I think the beauty of it is whatever works for you is amazing, right?
Yeah.
And what might work for one person doesn't work for the other person. And I think for me, it's just been, the internet is a scary place in a sense, but at the same time, the amount of information there, what people have gone through, and having that access, I love podcasts, and I love, sometimes you'll listen to something and you're like, I'm going to rewind that. I have to listen to that again. And it's making those realizations, in a sense that it maybe would have taken forever to learn that on my own, or maybe I would have never learned that.
Totally.
And now you have a chance to listen to something, and maybe it's someone that in general you maybe disagree with, but they'll say one thing where you're like, oh man, I can take that, I can use that. And I think that's that open-mindedness that in today's world has kind of gone away, where, well, you know, you believe something, like Josh believes something, so and nothing Josh says can be believable.
Yeah, that's never true.
I don't think it can be.
Yeah.
And I think we can take positions on, obviously, you know, there's obviously positions where you like, you know, like let's just not take that person's account into our lives because, you know, they're evil or whatever it might be. But at the same time, no matter what, anyone, I think you can learn something from everyone, and we can take a piece of that and say, oh, that one thing actually really struck a chord, or hey, like I can relate to that, and I think it's really important to have that open-mindedness, and especially I think in today's world more than ever, because everyone's made to be segregated. It seems like that's the way the world's
especially
going.
when the powers that be seem to be pushing us in those directions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's oh crap, I forgot what I was going to say. The internet is simultaneously one of the greatest things on the planet and one of the worst things on the planet. Totally. And I think that in this world, in this reality that we live in, things are so often that, you know, like empathy can be incredibly powerful, but it can also be incredibly malicious.
Right.
You know, and so can authoritarian, like it can be incredibly, like an authoritarian mindset in like in military context can be very useful, but then it can also be extremely oppressive, you know. And I think it's important to take a frame where we look at the world in that there's not good things and there's bad things, but there's the line between good and evil runs down every person's heart. You know what I mean? Totally. And that would apply to the internet as well. It's like, yeah, there's like, it's because it's made up of people. Totally. Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought process for sure. And I think nowadays having that, having the ability to think freely and use the information, have a network of people to bounce things off of, and have healthy friendships that you can, you know, have those conversations and unpack it. I love that saying, unpack whatever is going on. Yeah. You know, I think we're in a better spot than we can ever be. Or the other side of it is you're overwhelmed and bombarded with information and a lack of, you're never going to be good enough for, you know, I think it's it's a really tough place to balance at this point.
Well, you will have the biggest challenge ahead of you in terms of introducing a new person to this world. Totally. Which it's such a privilege to have that challenge. Totally. And I think you're going to do great.
Thanks. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.